Right, we're live. Welcome everybody to the latest edition of the Scholar Gypsies. I'm back with John Waters, author and journalist, and for a conversation. How are you, John?
I'm pretty good, Jerry. Yeah, as we say, all things considered, as we
Ha-
have to qualify everything nowadays. But actually, I am. I feel absolutely fantastic. I've I've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks with my granddaughter, taking care of her at night, and babysitting and so on. And it's just magical. And I was just saying, I wrote a phrase as an afterthought into my diary this week, which is that these are the great days. No matter what these bastards are doing to us, these are the great days, and we'll
Mhm.
remember for as long as I live, I'll remember these days, with Nina, and it's just magical. So they can all fuck off.
Are you spent just given that you're in Sligo IT doing the masters? Are you spending a lot more time in Sligo now? Obviously, must be, are you?
More, yeah, yeah. The thing was, Jerry, I had actually reduced my time here because I'd been doing the garden. So I've kind of made a big thing of this in my diary, the garden, and then the weather really turned 2 years ago. And I don't mean that it just got bad for a couple of days. It got bad for 2 years, and it's still bad. Uh, although I am thinking, although I shouldn't say this, I am thinking of resuming. I actually had to abandon my garden for 2 years, even though it was like almost like a show garden at that stage. I lost my greenhouse last January to geoengineering.
Geo and yeah.
Storm. That's what I call it. Storm geoengineering. Uh, um, so so I hadn't been, but now I'm doing 2 lectures a week in ATU Sligo, and for this the last term, one term on next year, and then we're on our own. But it's really amazing, but it means also that I'm able to be around. I have I have to make time to be around. I'm not somewhere else. I'm here, and this week in particular, Nina's mother was ill and was in hospital, and I stepped in and I had her several nights, and all that. It's just tremendous. Like it's just, it's been a long journey, Jerry. I won't go into it, but it's been a long journey going back to the beginnings of this, beginnings of Roisin and all that. And we had a hard struggle. We took a lot of abuse and flack from scumbags in the media and so on. And this is the reward now.
I
It's really
say
good.
I get a sense you're re-energized over the last couple of months, just in the output
I
in your
do.
Substack.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
do.
is that true?
Yeah, it is. It is, and gradually the process in ATU has been doing that to me too. It's a kind of a mixed thing because I'm kind of back in the pseudo reality in a certain sense. Yeah,
Um,
and but I'm finding a lot of this stuff really interesting and useful, and I'm kind of the people I'm meeting in the college, the lecturers, they're really great people, and I feel I'm part of the world again. Uh, and that's something you can underestimate in your kind of sense of anger or vindication or whatever it is. You say, well, I don't need them, but these are good people. They don't necessarily, we don't talk about a lot of stuff, but I like them, and they're really smart people, and I'm doing a lot of stuff that I didn't even know existed, about the body and atmosphere and connecting these different kind of things, how to write plays in a different way, and it's all kind of methods, I suppose. It's Peter Brook kind of stuff. It's Stanislavski and those kind of people who created this theory, but I've never done it, and so I'm kind of, my ambition is to write a play that will in some way, well, first of all, I'll probably write a dissertation on the question: is it really possible to write a play that has a message that still is a play, that is actually worth watching, that is worth, in other words, can you include, because there's this idea in the whole theatre business that, or sector, that you can't really mix politics and theatre, and yet they are mixed all the time, but sometimes badly. But can you do it It has been done, of course,
I
by
think it
correct people.
can.
Yeah, uh, yeah. And but can you do it in a way? I mean, I'm finding it hard to do it. I mean, I do think because you know, if you start off trying to communicate a message, you're not doing, you're not going. You need to come in through your characters, through your atmospheres, through your places, through your history, memory, all those things.
Yeah, I think it's to find, if you think of a song, and this is a much maligned man and person, is Christy Moore's "Ordinary Man" song.
Yeah,
Like there's a universality about that creation, that is separate to Christy Moore and
yeah.
whatever views you might have on him. But it spoke to me, it speaks to me now, that song, and as it spoke to me when I was like in my 20s, when I heard it first. And I think there's a thing where trying to communicate the global narrative in the local detail, you'll
That's
find
right.
like the local detail has a world of universality in it, without ever
Well,
having to without ever having to mention the name, if you know what I mean, like of what you're
yeah. You
talking
see, you said something to Thomas Sheridan in your interview there last night, whenever yesterday, that you but anger, that's you kind of had let go of the anger, or you didn't have anger about it, and I totally think that's vital, and certainly it's vital for writing plays. I think because that will be the death of because then you're into messaging, you know,
about. Mm.
and we should, you know, I think you know, there I sometimes have notes to put on the wall, like. Uh, Arthur Miller had a card in front of him every time he wrote, and it had one word on it, and that word was "forgo." And that means, you know, when you're thinking of wrapping up your crisis and moving on to your denouement, says no, give it another word. You know,
Hmm.
forgo the desire, you know, to reconcile, or to bring everything together. And I'm kind of inclined to write, you know, something like, you know, forget about what you want to communicate. Forget about what you want to persuade people of.
Mm.
Listen to your characters. Listen to, you know, that's a longer sentence than Miller's, like, but it's like that's kind of the thing I want to do, because unfortunately that idea that you can't mix art and politics, for example, plus what we've seen in the last few years, has meant that one of the main channels through history, the theatre was the
Mm.
place where the people
Yeah.
learned about their social. Like Miller also said, you know, all plays are social, and I think that they are social. They don't have to be socialist. They don't have to be sociological. Certainly shouldn't be either of those things. But they can be. They are all social because they're all about their common life together, and that's kind of, you know, more and more what you're seeing in art is actually part of the normalization process in
Hmm.
situations where, in a situation where everything is anything but normal, you know, anything but normal.
Yeah, and I referenced this when I was talking to Thomas yesterday, but I didn't reference this particular angle about that same train journey to Port Arlington. A lady sat beside me on the train, but one of the one of the interesting things in her awakening, and as I put it, like, process, was her granddaughter was visually impaired, and in UCG, but she was languages is her speciality, and the Russian language was one of the languages that her granddaughter was expert in. And what she noticed was that one of the things she noticed was the treatment of certain Russian literature post the Ukraine-Russia war in Trinity, and that department. And this woman, as I described her, she was like one of these, a very intellectual country woman that wasn't a professional, but an intellectual. And what she was outraged that literature could be Dostoevsky and people like this could be treated in such a fashion. by
could be punished
or
for
in a
Putin or
court.
whatever.
Yeah. So, and in a sense, that is the type of thing that awakened one person to, we'll say, maybe the corruption of our third level sector. No, they'll do that for, that's wrong. And it has nothing to do with Ireland in one sense. Like, you know what I mean? The thing that
Nothing.
the tipping point of the awakening moment had nothing to do with anything particularly Irish.
Here is the thing, Gerry, about that. And again, this strikes me, because this thought only struck me last week in relation to a particular episode. And I think I was thinking in particular at the time of the Enoch Burke story and that appalling judgment by that appalling judge of the High Court from during the week. And I've said it to several people now, that isn't it, like, you think back, if you lived any length in this time, I was born in the mid-50s, so I don't remember much of the 50s, but I remember the feel of the 60s. I was there when England were the World Cup, and I was there in the 70s when Horslips and St. Lizzie arrived, and I was there in the 80s, and I was there in the 90s and in the 90s, and all those. In each of those decades, it would have been impossible to imagine the Enoch Burke thing happening. It couldn't happen. There's too many safeguards.
Oh, too many.
From the point of view of precisely that woman on the train, that she would have been immediately mobilized against it in her mind, and so would a million other people.
Yeah.
And they would have, and that would have fed through all the channels that reached the top of the furnace that is discussion. That people would at the top, the representatives of those, the intellectuals, as you say, with a capital I, the civil libertarians, the protectors of civil liberties, the church, the bishops, the hierarchy, the theologians, the philosophers, the poets, the playwrights. All of them would be up in arms about this. This would be like Birmingham 6 plus Gilbert Flore plus Nicky Kelly. That's serious. That's what it would have been regarded as, because this man is completely and utterly a decent man. It's transparent, and yet this happens. And now, so going back to what that woman was talking about, what you were talking to her about, the same applies. That I would say that this woman is probably, she's like she's a kind of a wanderer, an exile in this culture, if she's
exactly,
as you say, now, because the culture does not support her. It's like a different country. It's completely impenetrable to the thoughts that she has. I feel the same thing, and in general. And that's kind of what I'm always trying to fix. I'm always trying to fix that unconsciously, is to put it back to the way it was. It's like Ireland is an engine, or is now a banger that's been brought in, and I've got it over the pit, and I'm trying to get it tuned up again, because it's firing all wrong. There's this missing on every cylinder, and I don't know. Obviously I can't do that on my own. But that's what I feel.
There, I think there's a number of us are in a broadly kind of spectrum of that kind of thinking, because when I look at the situations, and why I highlight these little details, even though they're and I've spoken about this with Thomas, was that lady sat down, she was wearing one of the blue COVID masks around her face. And so in one sense, if this was 18 years ago, I'd look out the window and just ignore her completely, or get in some sort of aggravation about, anger about this. But what ended up happening was the connective tissue to spark a conversation was the fact I was reading a book of Irish short stories by Liam O'Flaherty. And she meant she started the so I suppose when you look, and we ended up having a conversation about all the trans stuff, and it was very like, I remember getting out trans, that was a great conversation. I'm not meeting enough people like that.
And did you feel, Gerry, that in the course of that conversation, it was almost like talking to somebody who'd just been released from prison?
Yeah, like there was, but I also felt I vibrate at whatever's coming out of your heart and soul, even though we don't maybe agree on one, two, or three. I can see actually, if you keep moving in the direction you're moving, you'll get to one or two conclusions I've got come to, but I might come to one or two you've come to as well. Like, but what I'd be saying is, I very much felt I was having a conversation with a honest to God Irish person and who understood Ireland the way I understood it.
And the other part of that, Gerry, the kind of the unspoken part is, is that the parts that you don't agree with are fine too.
Yeah, 100%.
They used to be. In that model of reality, you didn't have to agree with her about everything. It might emerge in passing that she had a certain view of some particular issue that was the opposite of yours. And that issue could be little trivial or it could be great, immense. But that was fine. It was something you noted. You didn't immediately decide this is a terrible woman. She didn't decide you're a terrible man. She just said, we disagree. Maybe we'll postpone that. In a future life or time, we can discuss it again, maybe, and we will reconcile whatever difference there is or not. But we won't hate each other. We won't hate each other at the end of it. We don't have to hate each other.
And that's where I think a lot of the AI tech-driven stuff is leading us more and more and more, is to bring us to the conflict points with each other to start new conversations at our conflict point, as opposed whatever that conflict point might be, so that we're driven not to engage in these conversations. Now, the masks one was a big, if we go back 5 years, it was a big dividing point, because you're walking down the street, you see somebody with a mask, regardless of whether you agree or don't agree, you're kind of walking in an opposite direction, because your first instinct is not as them as Irish people or as someone that you have a whole history and of connection with, but it's that decision is not my decision, so we're not going to have the conversation about it. And we don't anymore seem to live in an environment that allows a broad environment to have a broad range of conversations where we can agree on 6 things and disagree on 4, but still be fine to coexist in the same middle.
I mean, all of this comes from the level of indoctrination, the intensity of indoctrination, that, and particularly this works on young people in particular, and the old as well, but, that they are literally kind of wound up to feel certain things are absolutely non-negotiable, and anybody who doesn't agree with this is a fascist and whatever, But, one of the things I've been kind of coming around to, Gerry, really, is that I'm actually a liberal, and that I've always been a liberal. And that's something that I actually had forgotten. I mean, liberal in the classical sense. Classic liberal, it's kind of a tautology. You don't need a classic, but it's just liberal. What's happened is that actually, for all of our lifetimes, pretty much, or certainly our adult lifetimes, what we've been confronted by is not liberalism at all. It calls itself liberalism, but it's a counterfeit liberalism. It actually isn't concerned with liberty in the slightest, quite the contrary. It is taking us, as you can now see very clearly, it is taking us back into a dungeon. And deliberately so, and implacably so, and silently so when the question doesn't suit it. It just like you just look at, Catherine Connolly, whenever she was asked a question in the presidential election that she didn't want to answer, she just shut up. But so I realized actually, I could be the last liberal in Ireland, Gerry, for all I know, because because you see, over the time, when you find yourself estranged from stuff calling itself liberalism, you start to try and think of a new label for yourself, and you kind of acquiesce in ones which never fit, or never fitted with me, like conservative. Do I look conservative? No. Like right wing. I'm not right wing at all, not at all. And I kind of, that's why I kind of move away from the elements of the movement, which take pride in saying we are right wing, we are far right, we are, No, I don't like it. It doesn't. It's not my way of seeing things. That doesn't mean I don't agree with them on any particular issue. It just means I don't like the designation because they don't have any meaning anyway. But that at the end of the day, I would like a world in which people are left alone to live their lives to the maximum extent possible, unimpeded, unmolested by power. That's all I want.
Well, we're on the same boat there, like, and I think you get the more freedom people have to express themselves, to do things, to create things, the better outcomes for the world.
Yeah.
The better outcomes actually for the world. And I think, you mentioned Catherine Connolly there. In the psychology of the nation, I would look at why did people vote for her. And in a sense, they believe they're voting for change in that vote. In one sense, it's a protest vote, but they don't understand that the minute Catherine Connolly makes her first speech, she talks about, our responsibility to climate change. That's her first, major output. And these are questions that nobody's put to her directly before she gets in there.
No,
And
you see, yeah.
and the Irish person, the average, I don't think her election means Ireland's shunted left or right. I think it's the average person thinks, she's an independent, she's not of a political party, and she's some sort of protest vote. But she isn't actually. She's the worst form of the kind of tyrannical society we've morphed
exactly.
into over
But
that
you see, there's a peculiarity about all this. Like I've remarked on repeat intermittently drawn through my life as a journalist. This total talk, always constant, persistent talk about the need for change. Now, you see, how many times can you change something without making it fall apart? You just try and take the engine of your car apart if you don't know what you're doing, and eventually your car will be just a pile of junk, or a clock, or anything like that. If you don't know what you're doing, and that's what change has done to Ireland. It's constant. Everybody comes on, and they're still doing it. I see the party of change. Change from what to what? They never say. And what is it, the parts that they don't like? And what parts are they now we're going to bring in? But it's change for change's sake. And at the end of the day, that means that they have, they don't have to be specific. And they don't have to have a philosophy. It's just whatever's there, we're going to change it. We're going to change it. Oh, yeah, let's change it. Why? Are you sure that's a good idea? Have you thought about it? Which parts? Yeah. Nobody ever talks about these things. It's like, yeah, let's change. And changing, we know, of course, as we grow older, we change. And sometimes, generally, if you know what you're doing, if you have a program and you take good advice and you read the right books and so on, then that change is highly beneficial. But you can change in ways that are not so good as well. And nobody seems to ever discuss that in a political context. That actually you could be destroying your country while you're changing it. And that's precisely what's happened.
Well, exactly, exactly that. But I suppose my hope is, I think this is all starting to bubble to the surface. And I think not just bubble, it's possibly erupting to the surface over the next couple of years. And I don't know how that manifests. I don't know what topic, or it might be something very small that is actually that causes the volcano to explode. But my sense is something's coming. I've personally found this year the most challenging internally of all the 4 or 5 years. There was a certain excitement, and there was a certain excitement is probably the best word to the 21, 22, because we were so kind of brought together in a closed space. Maybe 5 or 10% of the population, and yet I sense that's kind of the ties of that are getting looser, and there's something new. There's something more aggressive coming, and just as to what form, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think as well, Jerry, that parallel to that, or maybe consequent of that, the mood of the public has subtly changed and has gone downwards into a deep, whatever you would call despondency. I don't like the word depression because that's a constructed, Mickey-uppy disease. Uh, despondency, which is, sadness and grief and sorrow and all those things that are entirely understandable and rational in the circumstances. I think that people have gone into that kind of, and some people don't know they're in it. And if they are in it, they don't know, even if they know they're in it, they don't know why. And I know why, because it's what we've been talking about. It's what these bastards have been doing to our country and sucking the hope out of it. Literally, that's what they're doing. They're like really a straw, and they're sucking the hope out of our society, out of our culture, out of everything, and spitting it out into a drain. That's what's going on, because that's their instruction. And this is the big question now, Jerry. I agree with you, and I think that we are moving towards some point of denouement. The question is a race. It's a race. It's a race between the consciousness, the raising consciousness of the people, and the determination of the Combine to enforce their digital prison before that actually can happen. And in a certain sense, the Enoch Burke case is a kind of an emblematic episode in that, because they're trying to put him in jail, in a very obvious and open way, and for all the reasons which somehow reside in this story that he's in. And so the question, in a certain sense, it's kind of like almost like an Easter story. Do we look at this man in time to realize that he is our voice, the voice of our sanity? And do we rescue him in order to rescue ourselves? Do we stand in front of him when the Guard Stapo come to arrest him? That's what I would like to ask. And I think it's time we started to kind of precisely put things in those terms and say, enough of this. We're not going to allow this to happen. Because what's happening is they're trying to normalize the lie that was told about Enoch Burke from the very beginning, which was that he was insulting to the headmistress for no reason, when in fact she had asked him to say that 2 and 2 is 5 from now on, in effect.
I agree with you, and I think there's a couple of things you said there that kind of resonate. I think it's obvious now, as the judiciary are making, they're breaking rules in open sight on this case. And there's a certain panic in that. But also, I think from our point of view, if we want, if we forget about all these, protest marches in front of the Dáil, that kind of stuff, if there was a case that we should, as a group, get behind, it should be outside Mountjoy and Enoch Burke, if they do arrest him again and put him in. And
it should, Jerry, because
even that should be go on.
Hold your thought there for a moment, but just to add to that point, because that is the thing that will make this a global story.
Yeah.
Because it is, in its essence, it is the story that the American government is seeking to now to draw attention to, that the way that people are being treated in Western societies, the way they're being tyrannized by woke politics, etc., is incarnate in Enoch Burke. And that is our story. It is the story that could make Ireland the centre of the turnaround that might still come, it might not be too late for. Sorry.
No, absolutely, because I think that's, if you want one thing, as a kind of society, I think we need a win, like a really big one, and that would be one where, if you could get 50,000 people on North Circular Road outside Mountjoy protesting this,
Yes.
that, as you say, would bust, and I think that would actually bust open an awful lot of the kind of corruption, because when this road ends, however it ends for Enoch Burke, he is going to be the winner, and they all know this, but they're just
Yes.
trying to keep the race as long as possible before he
And it's
wins.
very important just at this point to say that what's happened in this latest sort of episode in this case is that a high court judge has disregarded a very clear and explicit ruling of a higher court, the Court of Appeal, which said categorically that the case was about Enoch Burke being ordered, instructed, directed by the principal of his school to refer to a boy as a girl, as they, to deny that he was speaking to a boy, in effect. In other words, to lie in plain sight. And the High Court judge repeatedly, several judges of the High Court, and indeed one or two of the Court of Appeal previously, have entered into that lie and sought to repeat it. And then Mrs. Justice Faherty, about 6 weeks ago, made a judgment which wasn't particularly favourable to Burke as a person. She went on with the usual palaver about his contempt of court. The contempt of court, Judge, arises because the behaviour of the courts has been contemptible. Got that? And that's what contempt is for. Now, so here is the point, that this judge is seeking to paper over the cracks that have arisen in the past, and to move past the Court of Appeal judgment, to treat it, some bothersome woman in the Court of Appeal has been sympathetic to Enoch Burke. That's not true. And she went out of her way not to be sympathetic to him in other respects, but on the fundamental point, she found in his favour. And now the High Court is trying to go back to its original lie, because that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you see, so this is part of the whole kind of normalization process. Nothing to see here. Look away. There's been meetings of the PR company, with their notebooks, and they're saying, well, the people in general still don't like Enoch, and you could get away with another slap on the head to him,
Well, yeah, and I think even in the judgment of that judge, he brings up how it was costing €1,000 a week for the school to get security. Like, in what way is that relevant to the point at hand? He's protesting outside the school. It's not specifically, if that's what the school want to do to counteract this, well, that's their own business.
But Gerry, you see, here's the point about that the dumbing down of our public discussion, the corruption of our media, like, you see, this is a classic example of what it means to have a corrupt media. Because if we didn't, we would have those issues teased out every day in comments, in columns, in discussions on radio. All these points would be made, and people would have them in their heads, and eventually would come to some kind of decision other than what they're living now is the propaganda headline handed out by the government. Enoch Burke was not, he's arrested, his problems have nothing to do with transgenderism. They're all to do with contempt of court. Yeah, what you call contempt of courts which are contemptible. So that makes Enoch Burke not a villain, but a hero.
Yeah, no, and the proof will be in the pudding now, because a lot of his soft support is starting to melt away, and by that I mean, I think John McGurk did an op-ed on Gript, where basically it wasn't a defense of Enoch Burke by any stretch of the imagination. So the light support, the soft support that's kind of, you think is there, there's an attempt to try and get that to evaporate with this. But
yes.
Just for me, that, there's almost the element of, look, this is going on too long. He for everybody, as if, bringing up the injustice at every opportunity should stop at some point if the system won't address it, which it refuses to do.
Well, exactly. Yes, and you cannot talk about anything that anybody might decide they wouldn't do if they were Enoch Burke or a member of Enoch Burke's family. You cannot talk about anything that has happened this on the part of the Enoch or his family that was not fundamentally connected with the injustice that began it.
And
therefore, they were using the modes of expression open to them in order to draw attention and to demand and plead in many instances before corrupt courts for justice, for the Constitution to be invoked on the basis of Enoch's right to the protection of his religious beliefs. That's only one aspect of it. There are many other aspects of it. You don't have to be religious to understand that it is wrong to demand for a principal to demand of a teacher that she tell a lie in plain sight, that he tell a lie about reality, that he go against the very basis of human reality in addressing a particular individual. It doesn't take much imagination. So all of this, is complete. It's just obfuscation, it's noise, it's smoke in order to disguise what's really happened here. And And the point is, I can tell them. I've told them several times. I'll tell them again, and I don't need to tell them. The Burkes speak for themselves. The Burkes are not for turning.
No, and I sense that from the very beginning that the state were going to be shocked by a man that has the courage of his convictions.
Yeah.
Even past the point, and the thing with leaders, and you see them going around, a key aspect of, and that's why there's so few of them, is with a leadership characteristic is that ability to walk alone when nobody else is following, and you have no guarantee that anyone else will ever follow. You're still not going to break that person. Now, they don't always turn into leaders, they don't always get it, but he's not going to break. And
that's so. Yeah, you see, Gerry, when you think about it, our country, our republic, was founded on the actions and the thoughts of men and women who were prepared to lose everything, including their lives, for a principle. We're in the state now, unfortunately, in this modern moment, 100 and odd years later, where nobody's prepared to lose anything for anything. No. And that's why all these terrible things are happening in our country, to paraphrase Solzhenitsyn.
But if you want to see the light in this story is, and it in the bigger picture is, if this was another family, if Enoch Burke was in any other type of family than the one he's in, the state, the algorithms, the systems of oppression would have found a way to break the family.
Yes.
To break him.
Yes.
And we're living in a society where, the core issue is the kind of destruction, or not. To break that tie, that the strength of that cord, when you speak about your granddaughter and your daughter there in the earlier parts of the conversation, is that to break the strength of that connection of family, and especially it's done all these attacks for me are primarily.
Hold that thought, Jack. I just want to grab my phone right over there. I'll be back in 3 seconds. But there's something I want to say here, because I'd forgotten this. This is something that happened this morning to me. And I got a text from an individual who, having read my diary entry on the Burke, on the judgment of the High Court judge last week, he sent me a very urgent text. And I want to read it out to you because I think it may be actually very relevant. 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, this is a very, very solid guy. Hi, John. Just reading your latest diary, and I'm shocked at what the judge said about Enoch Burke's approach by attending each day at the school. I believe he is paving the way for him to be incarcerated in Dundrum Mental Hospital, where they can medicate and destroy him. Indeed, this may be their intent now. This is very Soviet, Gulag, Siberia. Out of sight is out of mind. I fear that if this happens, we will never see him again. I think that's a very real fear now. Because the tone of that judgment and the succession of untruths within it, the accusations, that the implication that in some way Enoch Burke is a stalker, that he's prowling around the school as a threat to children and so on, it's a monstrous statement, and it needs to be addressed.
And it's just a projection of what the state policy is on him. Like,
yes.
The stalking of our children in the classroom with
yes.
all of this ideology. But
yes.
again, that brings us back to it does why the Burke's family unit is important, is why that I don't think can work is because they would need family to initiate something like that, as in, that move from, that type of an attack, which is why I think they are pivotal in ways we don't even understand yet for this country, that family. And, I say that as someone who doesn't, would raise my eyebrows at a lot of the choreography and the shenanigans that they go on with. But like, they are not going to break as a family.
No, they're not. They're a completely integrated family. They don't need anybody else. They're, they have got a lot of support, and they will get more. But I have before described them as the moral immune system of our country. And that's, we're down to our last family of heroes, who are prepared to risk things, who are prepared to, go out and make a show of themselves in a certain sense for the dull minds that contemplate them, and come up with their ready-made opinions and go on Twitter to express banalities then, against them. I think this is a critical moment, and I think my friend here, who has spoken in this way, that thought had not occurred to me, although it was implicit in everything I was reading.
Yeah, and it hadn't occurred to me either until you said it there. But I'm sure he's right.
Yeah, because once they get him into Mountjoy, they can easily get him into the psychiatric unit and so on.
Yeah, there's.
And who's going to stand up for him? Out here now, the civil libertarians have died. They're gone to heaven, or no, they're hell, or wherever. The liberal journalists are all looking at their shoes. The conservatives are looking at their shoes. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it's for me. The Irish conservative movement is very easy to piece together. Like, as in, if you look at the United States politics, you have the MAGA movement and you have the Christian conservative, and you're seeing the massive fallout between those two elements in the United States, as somebody described in the Christian Zionist movement in the US versus the MAGA movement. And this is the hopeful thing in the States, is it's the young MAGA cohort that are causing the eruption and their belief system on all this America first stuff. But you can see here, like, who fits into the Christian conservative movement. If you want to apply umbrellas to certain groups of people operating in Ireland. So if I look at people like Maria Steen, Declan Ganley, a few like that, John McGurk, they're carbon copies of the Christian conservative movement in Ireland. And when I look, when you look at the MAGA, if we were to be on any side of that, we'd be the MAGA. Like, we're more of the populist MAGA of what's coming out of the country.
Yes. We are.
The connectivity of the, and I don't apply them labels anyway, because I don't think we should be importing either of them into this country.
Yeah,
but they're very easy to see.
It's a useful comparison. It's not an exact match, but there's an interesting parallel, because those people that you mentioned, they're always behind the eight ball when something big is happening, and they're not necessarily on the right side. Gript has never been on the right side pretty much of the vital issues when it mattered, at the point where they could have made a difference. Maria Steen really has had nothing to say in the last few years about some of the most appalling things that have ever happened in our country, and which should really excite a Christian enormously in a very, very, vehement way, and so on, and so I agree completely, and the fact that the Burkes are evangelical should make no difference to Catholics.
No, and it doesn't make any difference to the ones I've ever spoken to on this subject either that are before them. And look, it's if there was a true movement in Ireland, a resistance movement, I think this is the one. This is the one at the moment that it should gather around
Yes.
to make a statement. Now, our capability to make any type of public statement in the last 5 years has been brutally bad, and I don't care who it upsets to hear that. We went from a situation where the first public protests in 2020 managed to get over 20,000 people on the streets, and we've not really managed to top that at any point since, even though the coercion and the obviousness of what's going on has
Yeah.
become
Well,
more
of course,
apparent.
as well, too, Jerry, that was because of the success of the far right smear, which caused enough confusion and befuddlement among people that they couldn't refute it. And of course, the media, they were persistently banging this drum, and you see, people do believe the media, and it's not surprising or wrong. I mean, it takes a long time to understand what propaganda is and all these concepts. You need a lot of reading and discussion to get to the point. So it's kind of slightly unfair, I think, to just simply decide that somebody is dumb if they don't see through it. Because the analogy I'm using about the TV, which is the window. Like, if you look out your window today, and I'm looking out my window now, and it's fine today, and I know that therefore, if I could walk down to the beach, I won't need a coat, right? Now that's information. That information, as of this moment, is extremely reliable, probably 100% reliable. I don't think if I watch it on my TV, which I don't, but if I did, that what I would see on there would be equally reliable and equally faithful to reality. I actually know that is not the case. But most people don't. They see their TV as another window, a bigger one that looks out on the great world and tells them what's reliable about, so therefore, they need help, and they need to be I hate words like educated. They just need to hear discussions between people like we're having, in which these things are teased out. And if they're not hearing them, you can't expect them to understand what you're saying in the general sense about this being all lies. Because it's not plausible that the newsreader sits down and writes 17 lies on a piece of paper and then reads them out. It needs to be elaborated, and it's not being. And that's where people still, even highly intelligent, educated, smart people, still trust. I meet them. I meet some of the greatest journalists I knew in my life. I meet them, and they haven't a clue what's going on. And I can't say that's their fault, because where would they find out? Because, they've been denied the information coming in through their own windows, as it were. And they've also been warned against people like me. So I can't, there's no point in me telling them. Because they'll say, oh, well, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, you're away with the fairies, And that's the end of it, So these are things I've been trying to draw attention to for several years now. That they kind of, the little details around the fringes are the things we should be focusing on. Because that's what will allow the message in to the people, if we can fix those. And that's never been done, never been attempted. I keep saying, every time people talk about a new political initiative, I said, why doesn't somebody start a new newspaper? If there's money, if there's funds available to do something, why don't we start a newspaper, or not an online newspaper, or a radio station, or something that people will get out? We can put out the word, and that it's on here. Pirate station. Remember pirate radio? It was powerful. Like way back in the day.
Well, of course, that's where it was powerful, and of course they roped it into local, like
Yeah,
that's where local radio
and
came out of,
sanitized it. Yeah,
and sanitize it to now it's just an effective propaganda machine in
yeah,
your local town and village.
that's right.
You know, even
That's right.
Micheál Martin's announcing there about you know, he was talking yesterday or the day before about climate, and one of the main elements he had was there was another 14. Oh no, it was on the cross-border initiatives, and the first thing he announced was there's another 14 million euros worth of investment for media. And this idea that government should be in any way responsible for funding, you know, media is just bonkers to me. Like, and
Well, yeah, yeah. It's all part of the whole stitch up of communications, and you know, you're going to be running right into it now again with your new book. Like I found it in with my book, and others I know have found the same thing. That, you know, again going back to that idea, Gerry, that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you couldn't imagine such things happening. But your book will not be permitted to be heard. As far as they have power to stop that book being read, they will use those powers. Are
yeah,
you finding that already? Are you finding that?
I've like, you know, I've had to use the tools that are available to me because you know, the book, you know, my financial state my financial statement of the last 4 years is just like this, based on decisions I've made, but like I'm comfortable to have made, in terms of leaving that world, escaping that world as much as possible. But what I'm finding is the first 3 or 4 days, it's only been out since I think Tuesday. It's done well, like, but its support from my readers on Substack have given it a boost the first 3 or 4 days. I've published it on Amazon because I can't afford, you know, the publishing industry is another industry we could look at in conjunction with the Irish media as to what they will publish and what they won't publish. Like, I can't imagine that your book, my book, or anybody else's, Owen Lennon's book, they'd be jumping up and down to publish it in the way they were jumping up and down to, you know, give maybe 50 or 100 grand advance to Tony Houlihan to publish his
No,
book. Do you know what I
no,
mean?
no. Whereas, well, you know, I mean, your book is, I mean, Unvaxxed Soul. It's a brilliant title,
Yeah.
and it's you know, it's very interesting actually. You know that your book, my book, Owen Lenihan's book, Eddie Hobbs' book. There's 4 books like in the course of a few months. It's a subculture, you know. It's quite an achievement to have, because it's a hard thing to get a book out. You know, it's not easy. I know. How did you do it? Like,
I did everything myself. Like, I edited it, designed the sleeve, I formatted it for publication. I got free software to kind of format it in a publishable. It has to be in a certain format to go up on Amazon. So it was a labor of, I won't say love, nearly fucking madness, to go through the whole process. But what I can say about it, it's done quite well. Like, I've written it to be, I've written it for an international, like, I've written it for an audience that could read it and not have to be from Ireland to understand it. And I've kind of took it. It's much more about the personal journey of the last 4 years, as opposed to attacking the things we've talked about in the way I do on my Substack, to broaden the conversation, because I wouldn't. Success for me would be someone like my sister and brother or somebody like that reading that book and having a conversation with them about it.
Well, you see,
and that
Gerry,
time.
I haven't read the book in its book form, but I read a lot of material over the years that you've written, which I think is incorporated, or some of it is incorporated within it, and your general sort of approach to reality and the way you write. And the way I would put it, maybe you contradict me on this, but it would seem to me that your writing it's in Ireland, but it's the universal in Ireland. You're not. It's not a to use a dichotomy which Patrick Kavanagh was insistent upon. It's not provincial. It's parochial. it's particular to the reality that it deals with, because that everything needs to be particular. You can't write a book about every place. You can write a book about everything that happens in one place. And I think that it does that. And you know, the thing that strikes me about your writing, Gerry, more and more, I don't know if this was an influence on you in any way, is what was called the new journalism of Thomas Wolfe and people like Hunter S. Thompson. You probably never read those guys.
Well, yeah, like I've read Hunter S. Thompson, and like if you know, that gonzo kind of journalism, if you like, where the writer is part of the story, if you like, as you know, and I think his famous one was the Kentucky Derby piece he wrote for, I forget, was it Vanity Fair or Rolling Stone magazine, one of them. It's not a conscious thing, John. It's probably there's truth in what you're saying there, but I wouldn't have consciously...
in an Irish idiom, and it's not the imitation. It's simply that you're approaching things in that subjective way, and you go out there as a searcher for the truth, and you tell what happens. And
yeah, no, I agree with you, but I'm searching for a personal truth, and somebody reading it might get something from what I think I've learned, if you know what I mean, rather than saying, this is true, 100%, come follow me. It's like, here's what I've discovered. Maybe you'll get something from what I've discovered, approach to. And like anyone that's, you know, I have a good, I'm lucky that I have a good, solid support readership on Substack over the last few years. But what they'll probably have noticed is that there's been two tracks to my writing. I think I've written 750 articles over the last 4 years, but you would probably see that about 20% of those articles are of a more personal fucking nature, as opposed to, you know, a current affairs or events of the day, or journalist type of pieces. And that journey has been going step by step over the last 4 years, but I'm almost at the stage where the personal road is the one I'm going to follow, as opposed to the outer world, as in that
the
solutions.
I mean, I over the years, when I would ever be allowed to give talks or lectures to trainee journalists, or, you know, students who were wanting to be journalists, I would always emphasize that the most important thing is to develop your subjectivity, your subjective eye, and your sense of yourself as a force a presence in the world, and that that's what, if I'm an editor, that's what I want. I used to say to them, I don't want another automaton giving me some formulaic prose that they learned out of a book.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Like my own view on it would be, it is very important if you're going to be if you're going to be dedicated to writing, and I think there's very few of us, like you're one, I am one, is we're dedicated to that craft. Besides everything else, you know, videos and conversations and all this stuff, you know, and that to me is, if I'm going to be that person, I have to have a voice, and you can't be afraid of it. And obviously my, you know, when you talk about the subjectivity there, that's really where, in my ears, that is your inner voice. Can you get your inner voice onto the page of what you're writing? And, you know, that often that inner voice is something you're trying to muffle, or you're trying to strangle, like, and you don't want to listen to it.
Does that come from a place where, you know, somehow over the years that there's been a deification of the idea of objectivity, and it's been drummed into journalists, oh, thou shalt be objective in all matters, when in fact objectivity is impossible. You know, what you need to do is admit your position, admit your bias, leave your bias open to being corrected by all means by the facts, but that's much more interesting to watch than somebody who's telling you, I am a machine. I am telling you what the facts are, you know, which is what journalists are now, so-called journalists, journal liars, as it turns out, who are taught now in these journalism colleges, because they all learn the same, you know, stuff, and they come out exact identicates.
Absolutely. And I think it's especially important now because we're talking about people, and include ourselves in this, is that you have a digital identity, and that is now the primary identity that people are associated with in politics, media, and everywhere else. And the the physical identity, whereas as a journalist you'd have to go to events and you'd be meeting people, and the physical interaction that readers have with the person they're following is much less, a lot less, and in some cases is zero. And I think one of the things with the way I write is that in a certain sense I haven't been able to hide who I am over the last 4 years by the way I write, so that people kind of figure, they kind of know what my flaws are. They know when I go off the handle and this is, oh, he's just losing. There's a certain
I think
tolerance
that's
for it.
yeah. I think that's a very beautiful thing, Jerry. That's what all writers should aim to be, because that's all we can do. We cannot claim to be
Yeah.
godlike figures, speaking from the heavens. We're speaking through our frailties and our inadequacies and our vulnerabilities and our strengths as well, of course, and all of things, the talents, whatever we may have been given to do this. But this is you see, it's another example, Jerry, of the way culture has gone backwards in our time. Like in the 70s, this revolution in journalism happened in America with Tom Wolfe. He was kind of that was what the new journalism, and that was the idea. The subjectivity was at the heart of it. And Rolling Stone and those magazines, Vanity Fair, they came out of all of that kind of explosion. Tom Wolfe was an amazing novelist, but he was also a very amazing prose writer, non-fiction writer, and he actually brought the two forms almost together. Like I would never say that journalism or that essays journalism can be the same as the novel. But boy,
No.
he almost made it such, And then suddenly we lost all that, and now we're going back to writing telegrams, in the paper,
Yeah. Or press releases, and
Yeah,
and I suppose the one, like, I have no, whatever the platform of choice is for people, whether it's digital media, audio, journalism, right? Like, I have no ambitions to be anything other than a writer.
yeah,
I'm not the writing isn't to achieve some other goal for myself, as
no,
in, and that's, I suppose, where I'd be with this. Like, as in, I'm not trying to be an activist. I have no, I don't want to be a politician. I don't want, I'm not trying to go somewhere else with what I'm doing.
yeah,
If you know what I
yeah.
mean?
That's interesting, because I recently did an interview, an online or a Q&A email thing with some students who asked me, and one of the questions they asked me, about my, your supporters, and I said, I don't have supporters, I have readers. Like, and this is what they constantly try and make out. You're John Waters, activist.
Well, this is the thing, is that is the attack model. Like, I think to be fair, I haven't got, it's a hard attack to have on me or you, really, like, and you more than me, but is that, they're trying to make out that you're just, you have this cloak as a writer over your shoulders,
Yeah,
and someday you're going to reveal that you have some manifesto to launch on the country.
yeah,
And that isn't the case, and you can tell very quickly. And there are, like, I do think there are people in there's media, alternative and mainstream, that do kind of have a grand agenda for themselves to go somewhere else with what they do. And I think
yes.
that breaks down because people
No,
see through it.
this is the destination point for me and for you.
Yeah,
Is
yeah, yeah.
we write about it. There's nothing. It can't get any better than that for us. We don't want to be president. I went for election, but I wanted to write about that and to see what would it be like to be a candidate in an election. And I wrote out of that experience, and it wasn't a pretty sight. So that's my job. I wasn't trying to be, an MEP. God help us. I was praying every night that I would never be elected, just on the off chance that I might have been. which is pretty slim. So yeah, but yeah, this is the point. It's about the writing, and it's about the reading, and it's about the effect that that has on consciousness in the world. That's what I'm interested in. Nothing else.
Yeah, and that's you. So, like, as much as we give out about the world, I'm very excited about the world we're in because all of the stuff. You're talking about the playwriting there, and getting back to that, and the creation of these space. It's an underground, an underground literary movements and stuff like that would excite me to build. If you were to play, the first thing that'd be going on in my head is where could we put on a John Waters play? You know what I mean? As in,
Yeah.
what would be a good? And it wouldn't, in the way my mind works, it wouldn't be one. It wouldn't be one of the traditional theaters or the
Well,
Abbey. It'd be like,
my answer
how do
is
you create that?
my answer is Broadway. Yeah, but it's interesting. I was listening to yourself and Thomas talking there on that stream we did yesterday, and it's very interesting the way when he was talking, asking you about your early, what you had been involved in the tech business, you'd been working in the tech business, and then you said that even before this COVID shit hit the fan, you had been working from home. So I just told me, oh, that's interesting because it's like you already had slotted into the mode of what was coming. And what struck me about that is that I have similar kind of experiences where it's almost like my life is being scripted now by somebody else. That and that I'm now in the final act. And I mean, to address your point there, I mean, that's a concern I have. I have a great sense that there's a kind of a gift in these things being thrown on our laps at this moment, unwelcome as they might be in other ways. But that as writers, they are the meat and they're the bread and butter of our existence. I don't mean materially. I mean in our imaginative lives, and that therefore the only concern I have is that I'm going to fucking die halfway through the third act, and that I won't live to see the denouement at all. I'll be still in the midst of the crisis, and I won't get to the denouement, and whatever happens then by way of what is the catharsis that is supposed to happen at the end of the play.
Absolutely. I think the way one way I phrased that in the book is that we live in a world where we've got this cold scientific phraseology that's taken over us, and it's up to us to find the poetry to defeat it, and that nothing else will defeat it. Like, as in that kind of resonance. And I suppose you just brought up about pre-COVID. I hadn't really thought too much about it until Thomas brought it up, but like I had been in a nice, like, the funniest thing was I started a new role in the job I was in the day the COVID restrictions came in. And if I hadn't started that new role, I would have been driving in and out to work every day. And it literally started, I think the restrictions came in properly on the Monday after that weekend, I think. But it was like, there's a certain, God, isn't that curious? But it's also a certain laid out plan as to that you're not part of are aware of. But when you look back and say, isn't that more than interesting that on the very day the COVID restrictions came in, I started a new role, which meant I was at home for the next 2 years, isolated. And do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah, I do. And you kind of then, I mean, it is like that thing is in your life now, and yet, and it is in mine as well. We're kind of working our way around whatever this monster is, and trying to find, make sense of it, and trying to, at the same time, prompt in some, whatever way it is that writers do, prompt some reaction, some response to it, But I want to ask you as well, Gerry, about you stopped drinking at what age? I don't know. Probably
I was
mid-30s, was it?
I only got this. It's 2017, January. So it's pushing 9 years. So I suppose I was 42. 42.
Have you found? Have you found? Because I found, but I just asked you, have you found this, that stopping drink after a kind of a period of trying adjustment and just dealing with the loss of drink, which is a particular thing. So it's the loss of a particular kind of fuel. But that then my whole life blossomed for me. My whole imagination, my desires, my ambitions. I don't mean materially careerist, but my ambitions to kind of engage with the world. And I realized that actually the drink had been killing that in me all those years. That it was like, in a certain sense, the drink was a kind of an excuse for not living. And that by shaking it off, like people often ask me, would I ever go back? Or I you see me eating a slice of whiskey cake to start getting alarmed, or sherry trifle, oh yeah. So are you? No, that's not the point. I would never. But my point is that I wouldn't take a drink now to save my life. Because I would lose all of what I've gained in my sense of being reborn out of this experience.
Well, yeah, and I think I would, how would I phrase it, is that by the end it was, there's a part in the book where I talk about the faux intimacy of alcohol, where it unlocks a part of you, or you think it's unlocking a part of you that allows you to express yourself in your most ideal thing. What you find is that quickly it becomes the cons of all that is not worth the ever shrinking windows of that you might receive back from it. So when the last 9 years, I started writing a month after I quit drinking. That's when I started writing. And that's the start of the book. But basically, that in itself is an addiction. Like writing is a bit of an addiction. So I have to be careful of that, because in my own experience, especially the first year or two after I quit, you start leaning on other things that are not good for you. And so the whole period of time from quitting drinking to COVID to now, that's been like a kind of pilgrim's progress of bumping into good things and bad things and trying not to get yourself killed in the middle of it. But the writing has been the thing that has been the thread that's got me out of every scrape, or it's got me back into the right frame of thinking and the right road again, if you like. So when that's how I put it.
Yeah, it's been astonishing. I mean, and not astonishing, but it's remarkable, your application to it, Gerry. That you constantly, and I know you go through different trials and tribulations like I do in different sort of maybe ultimately trivial ways, but ultimately you show up and you just do the job. And you just do it well, and it's amazing. I mean, you've gone out as a kind of an evangelist, recording the voices and the experiences of people who've suffered so much in these years. And I want to ask you, like, from that position, I've been out there in the way that you have, like, what's your sense of the country now, Ireland, compared to the country that you knew before? Because you have a very intense sense, communication of the country that we had, what it was like. What is it like now that is different?
I think there's vast strands of the country I don't understand. Like they're not the country, and I'm talking about the people. The west of Ireland retains. I don't have to look as hard for those threads to what I would call connection to the past that are important to bring forward in the West so much. And I brought this up with Thomas and yesterday, and it's amazing to me the number of the writers that are in the resistance that are also based or from the west of Ireland, or in the west of Ireland. And my sense, going back to that lady on the train, is the vibration of the Irish people that we're possibly not getting through to over the last 4 years is their vibration that something is wrong is rising all the time. And I think you see expressions of it in, the spoiled vote stuff. You also see probably even more the number of people that didn't vote in the presidential election. When you tallied that 12%, if that 12% stayed at home, you'd have had close on over 60% of the population that didn't vote in that election.
Yes. Yes. I think there's a degree of confusion, there has been, shared by all of us, including me, in different ways, about the mentality that we are confronted by out there. I don't think that it's actually that people are dim and don't understand necessarily. I think they pick up vibrations. I know that when I go out to where I come from and talk to my family and neighbors that I know, they tell me a different story. They tell me people know perfectly well what's happening, but they're terrified to speak. And that's a different matter than not knowing. And that tells me that what we need to do is, you see, that's why they keep piling on the knives about far right and all the rest of it. That's why they're, inventing stories about, guns for hire being bought in from Eastern Europe and, issuing, sitting in front of 4 men in balaclava, sitting in front of, a tricolor. Yeah, well, you didn't have to go to Eastern Europe to find that. That they need to keep that the disincentive to going further in the mind of the public. Just stop there.
100%. Yeah, like I said, I do see, like, we talk about the people. I do think that state and government understand that they've overstepped over the last 4 years. I think that they understand that well. That's why they're so frightened of, any little outbreak. And I think they have a plan to step half a step back. And that's why I think we're starting to see, I'd say Micheál Martin is for the high road soon enough. That's why Pascal Donohue's gone. That's why, what I think, and I wrote about this, is Justin Kelly being elected as the Garda Commissioner, and I think that Fianna Fáil Justice Minister, I think the two of them combined are what the future, that's the road that they're going to go down. It's going to look, and they're not talking to us, they're trying to convince the average person whose vibrations are rising that they recognize the harm and they're going to do something, when in reality they're not going to do a lot. Like when you bring up about this, this mythical fucking far right group that nobody's heard of, in the resistance movement, and two characters nobody's ever heard of, one Polish and one from Northern Ireland. That looks to me like an operation. Like,
it looked to me like a Shinner operation, actually.
Yeah. So like that to me is not. The only thing is, people need to be very careful that they don't get tied up into an operation where they could end up in jail just to make a statement for 4 years. To some state operation to kind of put fear in the population.
In my diary this week, I go into that in an episode where I think I was being set up in such a way to meet somebody who was trying to get me to talk about, the time for talking is over, this kind of thing, and I described what happened and so on. And interestingly, this person, you would have thought from the rhetoric that he was ladling onto me, that this guy, when I kind of rejected his overtures, would have moved on to others. There hasn't been sight nor light of him in the last 5 years, which is telling in itself. I mean, it would have been an identifiable person if he had emerged, and he hasn't. But you see, this is the thing, it's journalists exist now to tell lies. That's what they do, and it's a shameful thing. I feel that most of the time, Gerry. But there's one caveat or one proviso I would issue it there. It's just that I not all the time, but I have always an eye towards Prague in 1989 and what happened there, the Velvet Revolution. That to me is the ideal. It's the only way that I would want to be involved in a resolution, really. Because ultimately anything else will either fall short or go too far of what is needed and what is appropriate. And the idea that 1 million people could appear onto the streets of Dublin one night peacefully, and look at the videos online. There's a very good video actually, if people want to check it out. In a video of my song, "They Can't Stop the Spring" with Dervish, of the pictures of the crowds in front of the square, the balcony in Winchester Square in Prague in November 1989, and it's just so good humoured, so joyous, so harmonious of people. 1 million people in harmony. There's none of the kind of roughneck stuff that we've been seeing, and I fully accept that most of it is probably down to, infiltration, etc. But so I agree with you that as a writer we can only go. But Havel, he went that far, but he was prepared to lead the movement when it started. Now he was a younger man than I am now, so that's my excuse. I don't want to be anything. I just want to see other people that I admire and respect do this, and I will help them in every way I can until my last breath. So that's a qualifier on what we said earlier, or what I said earlier, insofar as that I'm a writer solely. I am a dissident as well. I am a dissident in the sense that I disagree. I dispute what is happening. I refuse to participate in it. And
you see, I'm a dissident as well, but I'm also a dissident. Why I think it's important, and I've got myself into trouble over the last few years criticizing certain elements within our kind of broad spectrum of the side, is that the function of that for me is I need to look into whatever it is that's coming out of the ground to make sure that it is a seed and not a weed. And what I've seen a lot of is a lot of weeds over the last 3 or 4 years. No one wants to see seeds or will shout it through the rooftops more if that flowers, if a seed flowers. But I haven't.
Yeah. Well, I certainly feel something needs to happen. I mean, that's one of the most frustrating things in a weird way. I mean, we don't want bad things to happen, but in a certain sense, nothing happening is just as bad things happening, because it frustrates everybody, it wears everybody out. People lose their sort of focus, and all these kind of distractions start to crowd in then. But yeah, I do feel we're 6 years now down the road nearly, and of this particular struggle, and I think we're definitely past Act 1. I think we're out of Act 2. I think we're about to enter Act 3, and that's the key. That's the one where.
And I think Act 3 brings in. I think Act 3 has to, if you frame it like in a play, I think Act 3 has to be a crossing of the Rubicon with the people who are out there and everywhere, and that our sense of ourselves as a country, nation, history, spirit, mythology, that these ties and that connective tissue is there, and that will be what springs a response of the magnitude that is required, because it's of a massive magnitude that we have to reject a lot of things that are happening. And I think unless it's sourced from that, it's not going to be of the magnitude required for what's coming.
I agree, and I was just reminded there, as we're talking in our theatrical metaphors, about the kind of somewhat reductive theory of movie scripts and theater scripts, that has developed in recent decades, whereby everything is formulaic. This idea of the reduction of the hero with 1,000 faces down to, that there should be a crisis on page 62, and and so on. But there's the reduction of that, just for people in kind of maybe don't know what we're talking about. This is actually, even though it's funny, it's actually quite useful. That the Americans, even the reductions are too big for some of them, so they reduce the reductions. And this is the ultimate reduction of the movie, of the theater. The 3-act structure goes like this: Act 1, monkey climbs tree. Act 2, man shakes tree. Act 3, monkey comes down from tree. So we've had like 6 years of tree shaking now, Gerry. It's time to get that monkey out of there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's time to try. It's time to start shaking the tree the monkey's actually in.
I'd be for burning the tree down at this point.
Yeah. So, but having said all that, there's a lot of I've seen a lot of good stuff. Like, you see, there's a new wave of people and ways of approaching this over the last couple of years. On even people like Derek Domino and that Unbroken Man, and they're speaking to different people, and there's a certain the Derek Domino channel is the element of comedy or the element of farce to all of this is important, because it's almost like the Irish people they don't need to see the tyranny of it. They don't need to be afraid. They need to see the actual farce of it to actually fucking do something about it, in a kind of Father Ted-esque kind of way.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I was reading recently in the course of my studies in theatrical story, is the Restoration period, which came after the Cromwellian era in England, when he was basically the king. Or wasn't the king, but he was, he ran England for a decade, and afterwards there was this eruption of which is called the Restoration, the Stuart Restoration. But in theatre, it was like all farce and satire and all that kind of stuff, and it was a great kind of sigh of relief after that decade. Well, we've had 6 years now of this kind of implicit low-level tyranny happening all the time, and it would be very nice if we could actually begin something that would restore the spirit of the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, to our culture now, because we knew a lot more then, Gerry, as a culture than we know now. This is the shocking thing.
Well, this is the this is what the younger generation will have to negotiate, because they're 10 times more well versed in the global arena than they are in the history of their own country, and the rivers, the lakes, the mountains of their own country, they're like, even talking to my own son, he's very well versed in the different ideologies of what's going on here, there, and everywhere. But as in their connection to the 5 square miles around their house, they don't have the same knowledge of it as I had as a kid, or because I've explored. Maybe it's because I spent a lot of time exploring lands and ditches and trees and all this kind of stuff. But that seems to not be, this is not to be as strong as it was.
Well, that's a very interesting thing, actually. And another thought comes into my head of that, because that was something that actually struck me many years ago about, and I was talking to somebody only yesterday about this, that, when rock and roll came to Ireland, it was highly mimicked from American and British sources, so. And that meant that even though you had folk songs about Ireland and Irish place names and so on, and you had even country and western songs about Four Roses, Linnamady, etc., etc. So that was intrinsically cultural. That response was intrinsically particular and parochial, right? The same was not true about rock and roll in Ireland until we got the Saw Doctors, who come from Tuam.
Yeah.
I actually thought that was a really important moment. Now it has kind of frayed at the edges and it's gone kind of nowhere in a sense, but it still has. That thing has now gone into the culture whereby people, Irish artists in that context, can now actually celebrate the particularity of their own place. Like I used to ask the question like if Bruce Springsteen can write an album called Nebraska, why can't an Irish band write an album called Roscommon? You know,
exactly.
You know, and that's the reason. It's a kind of a post-colonial hangover as well, and I think that that's seeped into the culture of youth in the last 30, 40 years, that it's kind of, we must look outwards. That's the provincial idea, that we must look to the metropolis, New York or London, for.
And that's because that's because of the digital tyranny of their phones. Like if we had this at the age that they've had it, and come into it when they have, we'd be very much the same. Like, but one of the hopeful things is if you look at a band that straddled all of the last 30 or 40 years, like the Wolf Tones, right?
Yes.
Now, I've been at a Wolf Tones concert in inner city Dublin in '97 when genuine Republicans were at it, and where they were wheeling out former IRA guys onto the stage. And it's gone from that to now they're a cultural phenomenon through being watered down in a certain element, and that they can fill Thomond Park with 25,000 people, of young people. So the youth are looking for, the way I look at that is the youth are looking for a ties to their country. They just can't. They don't seem as obvious to them as they were to my generation, and even more so probably to your generation.
Yes. Yes, it's a taming process, and it's also a renaming process in a way. I mean that in the past, you would have expected that you could talk to the members of Wolf Tones and find agreement with them about pretty much everything. I don't mean necessarily, but on the key issues, all issues to do with Ireland, to do with Ireland's integrity and identity and culture and so on. You wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed that any longer, as we've seen, for example, in the recent past with people signing petitions to cancel an Irish festival.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And that's, you see, there's a lot of stuff going on that we're only vaguely aware of. Like, I just have a theory that, in a certain sense, the Palestine-Israel conflict has been entirely appropriated for this purpose, to create division internally in countries, and to create a sense of, an alternative nationalism, i.e. Palestine nationalism, to which you can subscribe at the expense of your own, at the sacrifice of your own. And so all this stuff is going on as well. I mean, that was the thing, I think, just to take it back to the point you were making about politics, and the possibility that the politicians are now in a situation where they realize that the people are waking up or becoming aware, and they're going to need to do something. Isn't there the fly in the ointment there, isn't it? The fact that they're not in charge anyway. Ultimately,
this is it.
They don't have a decision.
No, and I went through this with Thomas, is that, Pascal Donoghue's going off to the World Bank. That's your reward. That's your little reward for.
Not so little now.
What,
it's not so.
For
$600,000 a year, yeah.
Yeah, but when you're in comparison to how these people have sold out the future of the country, it's it's shocking. And I suppose what they sell to themselves is, we'll have some influence in these organizations by virtue of the fact that Pascal is here, and there's two lads in Ernst and Young, Coveney, and that Father Glynn, Dr. Glynn, and it's like that's a substitute for having sovereignty over your own nation, having slight influence in the organizations that are actually running the country from outside of it. And that's,
So that's kind of like the ultimate problem, is that even if these guys are running scared, even if they know that the writing's on the wall ethically, morally, in terms of public opinion, they still have, a line of protection so long as they remain obedient and stupid.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that the minister, his name's gone out of my head. The current minister for justice is
O'Callaghan.
O'Callaghan. You know, even in something as simple as the hate speech law not getting implemented, you can see that the European Union are still pushing that hard at whatever levels and rooms they're going into, and they're not happy and they want it.
Yes.
And they're and you can see that he's trying to sidestep this on technicalities, as opposed to fucking telling them to go fuck themselves. We're not doing that. And that's just on one minor thing. Never mind some of the broader agendas that are hitting us
Yes.
at the same time.
That's right.
Which they're not even trying to fight back on.
Yes, that's right. I mean, they need that kind of legislation, not necessarily precisely in that form, but pretty much close to it. They need that for what they want to come, which is the digital prison. And they want.
Well, this is the whole. You know, that's probably an area that's worthy. That, you know, the whole bio-digital convergence. You know, I think that is. It's a bit like chemtrails a couple of years ago. That's all real, and that's all part of the agenda. And like,
Yes.
that's probably an area I need to be more well versed in going forward.
Well, I think we're all going to have to gin up on that very soon, because it's going to come at us real hard, Gerry. Yeah.
Right, we've been blathering on there for an hour and 40, so I'm sorry for taking up half your Saturday.
It's all right, Gerry. It's all right. And the best of luck. Congratulations on the book, and well done, and the best of luck with it. I know there's quite immense mountains to be climbed to get it out there, but you know, I think you've made a good start, and let's keep our shoulders to the wheel. I mean, I do think, you know, one of the things, just to finish that, I was talking actually recently with Owen Lenihan, who's another book out himself. What's it called?
Vandalizing
Ireland. And he was saying that he had initially a good response from bookshops. He was able to get his book in, and they would take it 10 books. But then they would sell out and they wouldn't replace them. And of course, you can see the logic of that is that, we're not censoring. There's no market for it, even though there's a huge market for it and for your book.
Well, you know, this is again, you know, these are some of the spaces I'm going to try. I was actually at Paul Kingsnorth, had his book launching in Charlie Burns. Yeah, you know.
Oh yeah.
And it was very surprising because he got a bit of jip from a couple of members of the audience, you know, and Paul's walked a different, you know, he probably wrote one of the pivotal essays of the whole UK and Ireland back in 21 called The Machine, and I think this book has come out of that essay. Yeah. But you could tell, like, he had an interesting audience at his book launch, but he got one member got up and walked out, and another was, you know, a younger fella, and they were trying to interrupt the flow of his conversation. He had another man there with him to talk about the book. But I thought it was very interesting because he would be someone, I was thinking to myself when I was watching him, I said, Jesus, what would happen if I had a fucking talk in this room? I compared to, you know, Paul's basically just talking about the digital, you know, machine.
What was their gripe, Gerry?
Well, one was, it was hard to tell because it was, you know, you encountered this in Fermoy with Thomas, where a member of the audience got up and they had obviously read the book, and they had a problem with an element of the digital, some section on the digital kind of thing.
I know what this is. Yeah.
And he couldn't stop himself from talking. You know, there was questions and answers to be at the end, and these people just kind of spontaneously erupting from two now only, but I put it down to the fact that it was in a sense a disease of the of AI, is that people can't actually sit, listen, and wait to ask a question. They had to get it out when
I've noticed that.
Point came up.
But I wonder, would there be a little bit more to that in this sense, that there's the group, that there's a company which I refer to as that tenacious group which takes a deep interest and profound interest in our internal affairs, or whatever. That they tend to kind of troubleshoot in advance of things, and I think Paul would probably be somebody who would be targeted by them, who is putting out an unwelcome message at this moment.
Yeah, it could be. It could have been. It was it was a minor little eruption, but the second guy was a younger guy. He was maybe 30, and it was all a bit strange. But I thought I remember just thinking to myself, if that's the type of flack somebody like Paul Kingsnorth is getting, that there's a lot of work to be done in the publishing and the kind of independent bookstore arena.
Well, I mean, I've already said before that. I mean, I launched my book in Charlie Burns as well in Galway, and they were very good to me, I must say, and very positive, and the crowd, it was a very wet night, but the crowd was huge, but it was pretty well, very receptive and so on. So I had no issues there, but I can imagine that Charlie Burns is being watched now by the kind of forces who we're talking about, as that it's not quite on message here, not quite on message, Waters, don't they understand that Waters is a problem, and Kingsnorth similarly. I mean, I have his book and I haven't started it yet because I've so much on, but I hear really good things about it, and he's a fantastic writer, and he's not with us, as it were, as far as I understand it, but in many things. But he's a different kind of writer, and a very good one. So again, and he lives in Ireland, and again, these are things that
he lives in the west of Ireland. Another one
in the past. Say who?
He lives in the west of Ireland. He's living in Portumna,
That's right. Yeah, he does. But here again, this is something that 20, 30 years ago would have made him an Irish superstar, at this stage, in terms of intellectual ideas and so on. But no, he's been ignored.
No, no. Well, well, I think he again is probably someone who has to walk the line, because he is, he's built up a huge critical presence, and I think his book actually did get to number 1 in the New York Times bestseller list for a week, he said at the thing. Yeah. So he's probably,
He's written a couple of exceptional novels as well. He's a really good novelist. One of these days, I think we will wake up and find that Paul Kingsnorth has won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and nobody in Ireland would have heard of him yet.
He's living there. It's very funny, but so no, that was that's just an aside, I suppose. But listen, I let you go, John. Thanks a million.
All right, Gerry.
For the chat.
Best of luck. Talk to you soon.
Mind yourself.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye.